Suella Braverman is under mounting pressure to get a handle on the migrant crisis as the government faces potential legal action over the Manston asylum centre, where conditions are said to be dire.
Due to overcrowding, new arrivals are reported to have been abandoned on the streets of London. We're now joined by the Climate Minister, Graham Stewart. Graham, we've got so many things to talk to you about this morning, but let's start with this sort of holy migration mess that we're dealing with. First of all, Suella Braverman's words on Monday that young men from Albania are coming here to partake in criminal activity, particularly related to drugs. This has upset the Albanian Prime Minister. Do you think she's right? Do you stand by those words?
Well, the largest group currently coming over on the small boats are Albanian, I understand. We're grateful for the cooperation of the Albanian government and have sent over senior police officers. We've agreed an expedited system to return people. But there's a serious underlying criminal element to this, both of the trafficking and sometimes the purpose of the people who are being trafficked as well. So it is a difficult situation, but, you know, we're best to use moderate language, but that's the underlying truth.
Because that language wasn't moderate. Forgive me for interrupting, and that was really my question. To actually say that, to say that they're coming to partake in criminal activity, particularly related to drugs, that's what's upset the Prime Minister of Albania, who you need a communication with, don't you, to make this work? Because he says we're essentially blaming problems here, crime and drug taking, on the Albanians coming in.
Albanian nationals do play a big part in the drug business in the UK, and the trafficking through these small boats forms part of that. So those are the facts. That's not using inflammatory language. That is the situation. But you're right. We look to cooperate with our neighbours, whether it's Albania or indeed France, with whom you know, I know the Prime Minister was in contact with President Macron last week. But the facts are the facts, and it is unacceptable to my constituencies up in East Yorkshire as much as it is, well, as for those in Kent, in Thanet and the surrounding area who have to put up with this. It's illegal. People are coming over claiming asylum from perfectly safe fellow Western democracies, and I'm pleased that we've passed the Nationality and Borders Act. It would have been good if opposition parties had also supported us in doing that, as we look to break the back of the business model of criminals, some of whom are indeed Albanian, and seeking to make sure that we don't have this millions of pounds a day spent on putting people up in hotels, that we have a processing centre which is overwhelmed, as my colleague, I think Robert Jenrick, has talked about, and we are, but you know, the Home Secretary is getting a grip on it, has surged 500 more staff into that centre over recent weeks and months, is looking to improve other systems, to have a sort of one-stop shop delivery system, which is part of that bill. There's a lot going on, but I and everyone else in the country are frustrated at the slowness and the lack of progress in a way.
OK. Let's talk about COP27, because, of course, we've seen the Prime Minister do a U-turn, a dramatic U-turn, and is now going along to COP27. Why didn't he just agree to go in the first place?
Well, he came in. We were facing this significant economic challenge and crisis. He wanted to focus on... That hasn't
changed, has it?
Well, but he came in looking to get on top of that. That was his number one priority, and he was quite right to focus on getting himself in the
now, then?
He was right to focus, was he not, on getting on top of that, working with the Chancellor, and he has been able to work flat out on that, get in a position where he can go to Sharm. I'm delighted he'll lead our delegation, and rather than having a big journalistic gotcha on whether he was going to go or not, he is going, and it's great. And it's so important we follow up on Glasgow, and we encourage other countries to do what we've done, and that is set a pathway to net zero in 2050. Because if we don't, the whole world is going to suffer.
No one would disagree with you there. Will the King be allowed to go now as well?
We don't comment on what His Majesty does or doesn't do. but he has played a significant part in raising environmental concerns over many years, and I'm delighted to say he will be hosting various events that celebrate the end of our COP presidency, which has seen such a significant shift from, I think it was just 30% of global GDP was covered by net zero pledges in 2019 when the UK took over the COP presidency. It's now more than 90%. It's a phenomenally significant and historic diplomatic triumph for this country, and the King has been very supportive and will continue to be supportive, holding events at Buckingham Palace and elsewhere.
It will, I'm sure you'll agree, be great to see him there if he's indeed allowed to go there. You mentioned about leading the world when it comes to commitment to trying to lower emissions, to leading this sort of the conversation on how we can get greener energy involved. Last year, Alok Sharma, who was the president of COP26, asked every country to increase their commitment to lower emissions. In September of this year, our government didn't strengthen its targets at all. That's hardly leading the way, is it?
Well, we've already put in law the Climate Act, committed originally to an 80% reduction in emissions. We then strengthened that to moving to net zero by 2050.
But in September, the choice was we didn't strengthen. You know exactly what you're trying to say. You want to lead the conversation. You want to lead the world, but we haven't done that, have we?
If you are already on the path to net zero, you don't need fundamentally to change your NDCs, your nationally determined contributions. If you've already set a pathway that takes you where you need to go to contribute your part to the global solution, it's others that need to follow us. It's quite hard to move something even further, which is already on path. That's what we're doing. Is we've reduced our emissions by more than any other major economy in the world since 1990. I mean, let that sink in. We have transformed our renewable from just, I think it was 6.8%, less than 7% of electricity came from renewables when Labour left power. It's now more than 40. We've reduced our emissions more than any other major economy and still increased our GDP, our wealth as a nation. So we are on that path. And we are leading the world, not only in the conversation, but in delivery. And it's worth celebrating that. And it would be great to have a question that started by noticing that and then looking to see. The question isn't what the UK does so much, although it's very much my focus to make sure we stay on track. It's to get the rest of the world to come with us. That's why things like the breakthrough agenda that we launched at Glasgow, looking at specific industrial segments. It's why things like hydrogen and carbon capture, without which it's hard to see that we can decarbonise heavy industry, are being pioneered in the UK, and we'll have more news about that shortly. We're doing a lot. I'm really proud of it, and there are going to be an enormous number of jobs and prosperity that come from us leading the world in this challenge as well.
You've got that out. It's good to hear it, and I'm glad you had a chance to say it. However, some of those things you mentioned are under question, aren't they? Can you give me an example of a pledge the Prime Minister made in his leadership campaign, including ones related to your area, climate, that are being upheld?
Well, he's committed to net zero, and that is upheld. And not only is it upheld, not only is it...
Things like using wind, increasing wind turbines, areas to do with building on greenbelt, using farmland for solar panels. Some of the areas that he dealt with in his leadership campaign, are they changing or are any staying, to your knowledge?
Well, we're absolutely focused on making sure that we do deliver our renewable targets. Offshore wind, we transformed the global economics of that. We've got about 10 gigawatts of that today. We've set a target of 50 gigawatts by 2030. We are doing more solar. We are supporting wind. We are supporting nuclear and new technologies. It was great to see in the last contract for difference around. We saw tidal for the first time, 40 megawatts of that. So we're developing that. And of course, floating offshore wind. We have a shallow continental shelf, so we can hammer it into the seabed. Most parts of the world don't. But actually, the UK is a global leader in floating offshore wind, which could be part of delivering what we need, but also developing those technologies and businesses here that can export all around the world. We're doing a lot. The Prime Minister's totally committed to doing it. But we, of course, will always balance tackling this with, food production and the like as well. So it's always getting a proportionate balance while staying focused on our legal obligation to deliver net zero.
OK, Graham Stewart, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks for joining us.